Hey everybody, Professor Benlou with the second of two videos explaining Unit 4 discussion board assignment. Hopefully you're finding the videos helpful. All right, the first topic that you can choose from, remember this video is going to be going over the 4 topics you can choose from for this incredibly important assignment. The first topic you can choose is Reaganomics. To understand Reaganomics, you have to understand that in January of 1981, when Ronald Reagan took the oath of office as our 40th president, the economy was still suffering from inflation and slow economic growth that had plagued both Ford and Carter. Reagan entered into the White House with the purpose in his economic policy of providing everybody with a little more spending money, okay? So he instituted what would be called Reaganomics. Reporters ended up dubbing it Reaganomics. Reaganomics, the cornerstone or the key to Reaganomics is the belief that cutting taxes for the wealthy and big businesses will benefit everybody. The wealth will trickle down to the lower and middle classes. Okay. Reagan was a big proponent of smaller government, and he felt that the middle class would benefit from more simplified tax codes. He cut about $41 billion from the federal budget, which is a lot. And a lot of that had to do with social programs. Supply side economics is a big part of Reaganomics. This is the part of Reaganomics. This is cutting taxes for businesses. Big businesses will benefit the lower and middle classes as well. The wealth will trickle down. So remember, this document that you're going to be analyzing is an interview with Reagan regarding the Tax Equity and Responsibility Act. So you want to pay attention to this section in particular. This was a law that was passed in 1982 that closed tax loopholes and restricted benefits and pension plans. The goal of this was Reagan wanted this to help pay the national debt without having to raise taxes. It helped out somewhat, but not as much as Reagan had hoped. The gap between the rich and the poor continued to grow during Reagan's 8 years in office. He did not increase the minimum wage during his presidency. And federal funding for firefighters, policemen, and education were all cut during Reagan's term in office. To really judge the success of Reaganomics, you have to look at how the lower and middle classes fared during his time in office. Single mothers in African American households were particularly hardest hit in the decline in income during Reagan's time in office. And in 1984, Reagan further slashed the tax rates of the wealthy, causing an even larger federal deficit. And then in his second term, the deficit ballooned because of his focus on military spending. Okay, the second topic that you can go over is this first Gulf War. And we're going to be talking about President George H.W. Bush, his speech in front of the United Nations General Assembly regarding Iraqi aggression. August 2nd, 1990, Iraqi forces invaded and took over Kuwait. Kuwait is a very oil-rich nation. President George H.W. Bush demanded the withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Iraq. Saudi Arabia accepted United Nations coalition forces into their country. Remember, everybody, during the first Gulf War, the United States led United Nations coalition forces. And Saudi Arabia allowed themselves to become the base for these forces because their thinking was, well, we're a very oil-rich nation as well. And if Iraq has taken over Kuwait, then heck, we might be next. So anyway, that was the whole modus of that. Since the U.S. had previously been an ally of Iraq, Saddam Hussein felt the U.S. would not intervene when he invaded Kuwait. He miscalculated the United States, most definitely. Coalition forces quickly liberated Kuwait and headed into Iraq. Even though we had won the war, Saddam Hussein remained in power. He remained in power from 1991 to 2003. So very, very interesting. And it's interesting because a lot of people, criticized former President George H.W. Bush for not ousting Saddam Hussein back in 1991. However, you have to keep in mind that the Middle East has always been an unstable area of the world. And if you took Saddam Hussein out of power in the early 1990s, you would have created a power vacuum, which would have made an unstable area of the world even more so. President George H.W. Bush spoke before the United Nations General Assembly October 1st, 1990. about 2 months after the Iraqi invasion and takeover of Kuwait. In this speech, he condemns Iraqi aggression and calls on the United Nations to demand a return of Kuwait. And that he basically states that the United Nations can aid nations to come together to prevent aggression and punish the aggressors. Okay, the third topic you can choose from is the rise of conservatism. The primary document you're going to be analyzing in this one is Pat Buchanan's speech before the Republican National Convention in August of 1992. Sorry about that. Buchanan, a conservative commentator, had been a candidate for the Republican nomination, but lost it to President George H.W. Bush. But he was chosen to give a very important speech in front of the Republican National Convention in August of 1992 in support of the re-election campaign of President George H.W. Bush. In this speech, this is very important, he talks about a culture war. What is the culture war that he's talking about? And then he goes into how George H.W. Bush is the right man to lead the nation through its current difficulties. What is the culture war? What was his opinion on this? And what topics of debate was he talking about? Are liberals and conservatives still debating the same topics today? Get into this. It's very interesting. Okay, the fourth and the final topic is Reagan's tear down this wall speech. Reagan was an incredible speaker. He was known as the great communicator, and that's not for nothing. He gave this speech in front of the Berlin Wall in June of 1987. During this speech, he urged an end to the Cold War and the spread of democracy through the countries that were formerly under communist rule. And he emphasized the hardships endured by Berliners since the wall had been created in 1961. So that's the end of the Cold War topic. So I hope this video has helped. Dive into these topics and don't hesitate to contact me with any questions. Remember, you can do this. Stay C2 strong. And let me know if you have any questions. Good luck, everybody.